The war was finally over. Marcus walked slowly through the quiet, shattered landscape, feeling the weight of every battle he had fought pressing on his shoulders. For years he had been a soldier, fighting across countless planets, through endless skies and alien cities. But now there was silence. The explosions, the alarms, the constant tension, they were gone. In their place was a strange stillness that made the devastation feel even heavier. Buildings that once touched the sky were now nothing but twisted metal and broken stone. Streets were empty, littered with debris and the faint smoke of fires that had long since died down. It was a scene of total destruction. Yet Marcus could not help but notice the little signs of life that remained. A bird flitted between the ruined walls. A plant pushed through cracked concrete, small reminders that the world could survive if given a chance. Marcus had learned to be careful. Even after the war ended, danger lingered. Rogue fighters and desperate survivors roamed these places, and while most wanted peace, some would still attack anyone who seemed vulnerable. But he felt a strange sense of calm as he moved carefully through the ruins. The weight of his uniform and weapons felt heavier than ever, but he knew he had a purpose here. Part of that purpose was to help rebuild, and another part was to deal with those who had survived the war. As he walked, Marcus saw the records of the alien citizens who had lived in this city. The war had left so many families broken, so many lives lost, and yet some had survived. It was hard to imagine how anyone could have endured so much. The reports were organized, almost clinical, listing who had died, who had fled, and who remained. And then he saw a name that caught his attention. Lyra. She was young, described in the records as a slave under the alien regime. That simple word, slave, made Marcus pause. He had seen what that meant during the war, how people could be treated as property, stripped of their freedom and dignity. And now, by some strange twist of bureaucracy, she had been assigned to him. It was not something he wanted, not something he had asked for, but the system had chosen him, and he was responsible. He wondered what her life had been like, what she had endured to survive the horrors of the war. The first time he saw her in person, Marcus was struck by how fragile she seemed. Lyra stood at the edge of the ruined city, her eyes wide and cautious. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, her skin shimmering faintly in the broken sunlight, her hair falling like a cascade of silver. But what impressed Marcus more than her appearance was the strength that lingered in her posture. She had survived something no one should have to survive, and that gave her a quiet power. Lyra did not speak his language fluently at first. Her words were broken, and she often looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Marcus could see the pain in her eyes, the memories of a life that had been stolen from her, and it made him uneasy. He had always been trained to fight, to protect, to follow orders, but this was different. This was about human responsibility, about caring for someone who had already suffered more than most could imagine. He knew he could not treat her like an object, like some item he had inherited. He needed to help her heal, to show her that she had the right to be free, even in a world that still felt dangerous. The first few days were difficult. Lyra was hesitant, mistrustful, and sometimes even silent for hours at a time. Marcus gave her space, trying to be patient, but he could feel the tension between them. He wanted to say something to make her feel safe, but he knew words alone could not erase the past. Instead, he focused on small gestures, offering food, providing water, helping her rest. Little by little, she began to respond. A small smile here, a nod there, subtle signs that she was starting to trust him. Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. It was not much, but it was a start. As the days passed, Marcus began to learn more about Lyra. She had grown up under the strict rules of the alien regime, never allowed to make her own choices. Her family had been taken from her, leaving her alone in the world. Yet despite everything, she had survived. She had learned how to navigate danger, how to find food and shelter, how to avoid those who would harm her. Her resilience amazed Marcus. He realized that she was more than a survivor. She was someone who could teach him about courage, about hope, about endurance. Marcus also struggled with his own memories. The war had left scars on his mind as well as his body. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the battles he had fought, the faces of those who had died around him. But being with Lyra gave him a strange kind of purpose. Protecting her, helping her regain a sense of safety, gave him a reason to keep going. He wanted to be the kind of person who could make a difference, even in a world that had been broken by war. One afternoon, as they sat together in the ruins, Marcus finally spoke. His voice was gentle, careful, as he asked her about her family, her life before the war. Lyra listened, hesitant at first, then slowly began to share small details. She spoke of her home, of the people she had known, of the moments of happiness that had existed before everything was destroyed. Marcus listened without interrupting, without judgment, simply allowing her to tell her story. In that moment, he realized that his responsibility was not just to keep her safe from harm, but to honor her story, to help her rebuild her life. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink over the broken city, Marcus felt a small sense of hope. The war was over, yes, but a new challenge had begun. Helping Lyra, guiding her toward freedom, was not something that could be done quickly or easily. It would take time, patience, and care, but Marcus was determined. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was fighting for something, worth protecting. Not a territory, not a mission, but a human life. And as night fell over the ruins, Marcus and Lyra sat together, sharing the silence. The stars began to shine above, distant and bright, reminding them both that the universe was vast, but not without beauty. In the aftermath of destruction, they had found each other. And in that fragile, quiet moment, Marcus understood that this was only the beginning of a journey, not just for Lyra, but for both of them. Together, they would navigate the challenges of a post-war world, learning to trust, to heal, and to discover what it truly meant to be free. The first time Marcus truly interacted with Lyra, he felt a mix of curiosity, caution, and responsibility. She stood in the shadow of a collapsed building, her silver hair catching the faint light of the ruined city. Her eyes were wide, cautious, and guarded. Marcus could see the fear lingering there, the same kind of fear he had seen in soldiers and civilians alike during the war. But beyond that fear, there was something else. A quiet spark of intelligence, of awareness, of strength. She was no ordinary survivor, and Marcus realized he would need patience and understanding if he wanted to help her. Their first moments together were awkward. Lyra spoke a little of his language, but not enough to carry a full conversation. Marcus tried to be careful with his words, using simple phrases and gestures. At first, she did not respond, standing silently, watching him as if measuring him. Marcus understood her hesitation. Trust was not given easily, especially to someone who had been treated as property for her entire life. He had learned long ago that respect and patience were far more important than force or authority. Over the next few days, Marcus focused on the small details of Lyra's care. He showed her where to rest safely among the ruins, offered her food, and helped her understand that she no longer had to follow orders from anyone but herself. At first, she accepted these gestures with polite distance, but she did not let herself relax completely. Marcus knew it would take time before she felt truly safe, but even small signs of trust, a nod, a soft glance, a hesitant smile, felt like victories. He understood that building trust was a slow process, and he was willing to take that time. Marcus also noticed the subtle ways in which Lyra adapted to her new life. She was cautious but observant, learning quickly how to move safely through the city, how to find shelter, how to avoid dangers they had not yet seen. Despite her past as a slave, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that impressed Marcus. He began to realize that she had survived not just because she was careful, but because she was strong, clever, and resilient. Her eyes held stories he could not yet understand, but he knew that learning about them would take patience and care. Communication remained a challenge. Marcus tried to teach her new words, simple phrases that could help her feel more confident and independent. Lyra, in turn, began to teach him about her culture, sharing small details of her home world, her customs, and her experiences before the war. Marcus found these stories fascinating. They were full of beauty and complexity, revealing a world he had never known. He listened carefully, realizing that understanding her culture was another step toward helping her feel respected and valued. 1. Afternoon, as they explored a ruined park together, Marcus noticed Lyra pause to look at a small plant growing through the cracked pavement. It was tiny, green, and fragile, yet it had managed to survive despite the destruction around it. Marcus pointed to it, and she smiled slightly. It was a small moment, but it carried meaning. Survival was possible, even in the midst of destruction. Both of them had survived the war in different ways, and now they were learning that life could continue even after loss. As days turned into weeks, Marcus began to see Lyra's personality emerge more clearly. She was curious about everything, asking questions about Earth, about humans, about his life before the war. Her questions were thoughtful, sometimes even humorous, and Marcus found himself smiling more often than he had in years. He realized that their connection was growing beyond simple responsibility. It was becoming a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Lyra was no longer just someone he had inherited. She was someone who could teach him, challenge him, and share experiences with him. Yet the past was never far behind. Lyra sometimes froze at sudden noises or flinched at unexpected touches. Marcus could see the shadows of trauma lingering in her eyes. He understood that these reactions were natural, that healing was not a straight path, but a journey with many steps forward and backward. He remained patient, offering reassurance without forcing her to confront her fears too quickly. Slowly, she began to relax, understanding that Marcus would not harm her, that she was free to make her own choices now. In addition to trust, Marcus began to teach Lyra about practical skills she would need to survive in the new world. He showed her how to navigate through the ruins safely, how to gather resources, and how to protect herself from potential threats. Lyra was a quick learner, adapting her previous experiences to the new environment. She listened carefully, asked questions, and practiced diligently. Marcus felt a sense of pride in her progress, knowing that her growing independence was proof of her resilience. Their evenings were often spent sharing stories. Marcus would tell Lyra about life on Earth, about simple pleasures like music, books, and food. Lyra would respond by telling him about her childhood, her family, and the traditions she cherished before the war. Even though their worlds were very different, they found common ground in small moments. Laughter at a shared joke, fascination at a new story, comfort in silence as they watched the stars above the ruined city. These moments helped Lyra feel human again, not just a survivor or a slave, and they reminded Marcus why he had taken responsibility for her care. One day, as they sat together under the faint light of the distant sun, Marcus realized something important. He did not see Lyra as a possession, nor did he see her as someone who owed him obedience. He saw her as a person, someone strong, intelligent, and worthy of respect. She had endured horrors that he could barely imagine, and yet she had survived. She had hopes, fears, and dreams, just like anyone else. Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility, not to control her, but to support her as she rediscovered her freedom. The bond between them grew stronger every day. Trust, patience, understanding, and shared experiences began to form a foundation for a relationship built on equality and respect. Lyra began to smile more, to speak more confidently, to explore the world around her with curiosity rather than fear. Marcus began to feel a sense of purpose beyond the battlefield. Protecting Lyra, helping her reclaim her life, and learning from her experiences gave him hope and a sense of meaning that he had not felt in years. By the end of this period, both Marcus and Lyra understood that their connection was more than circumstance. They were learning to trust each other, to communicate despite differences, and to face a dangerous, unpredictable world together. Each day brought small victories, moments of understanding, laughter, or simple shared comfort that reminded them both of the resilience of life. And though the scars of the past were still present, both human and alien, the growing bond between Marcus and Lyra offered hope for a future built on respect, freedom, and mutual care. For Marcus, Lyra was no longer just a responsibility assigned by a system he did not fully understand. She was a living, thinking, feeling individual who had survived immense hardship. For Lyra, Marcus was no longer just a guardian or caretaker. He was someone who offered safety, understanding, and a glimpse of what life could be like when freedom and respect were finally restored. Together, they began a journey of trust, healing, and companionship, learning that even in the aftermath of war, connections could grow and hope could flourish. Life in the aftermath of the war was not easy. Even though the fighting had ended, the galaxy remained full of challenges. Cities lay in ruins, resources were scarce, and tension lingered among the survivors. Marcus and Lyra had to navigate a world that was unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Yet despite the difficulties, they were slowly learning to depend on each other. Their relationship was no longer just about protection and survival. It was about trust, understanding, and companionship. Marcus began to notice how Lyra's personality continued to grow. She was no longer the silent, cautious girl who had first appeared before him. She had begun to speak more confidently, sharing her thoughts and feelings, asking questions about the world she had never known, and even laughing at small jokes. Her eyes, once full of uncertainty, now reflected curiosity and intelligence. She was discovering her voice, her own sense of agency, and Marcus felt a deep sense of pride in her progress. Every small step she took toward independence was a reminder of her strength. At the same time, Marcus was also learning from Lyra. Her perspective was different from anything he had ever known. She described the alien worlds she had grown up on, the customs and traditions of her people, and the ways her society had functioned before the war. Through her stories, Marcus began to see the complexity and beauty of a culture he had once considered alien and distant. It fascinated him, and he realized that understanding her world was essential if he wanted to truly support her. He listened, attentively, asking questions, and sometimes just sitting in silence as she explained things in her gentle, thoughtful way. Challenges were always present. Even in the post-war world, threats could appear without warning. Rogue factions, scavengers, and those who resisted the new order sometimes attacked anyone who seemed vulnerable. Marcus trained Lyra to be careful, teaching her how to read the environment, recognize danger, and respond quickly. At first, she was hesitant, unsure if she could handle the responsibility, but she quickly proved to be resourceful and clever. She learned fast, using her past experiences to anticipate problems and think ahead. Marcus realized that she was not just a survivor, she was becoming a strategist in her own right. Despite the dangers, they began to explore more of the ruined city together. They would walk through empty streets, climb over debris, and search. abandoned buildings for useful items. Lyra showed curiosity about everything they encountered. She asked Marcus about Earth and human customs, wanting to understand more about the people who had won the war and why it had happened. Marcus shared what he could, describing the planet he had come from, the experiences that shaped him, and the lessons he had learned through the years. These moments created a bond between them that went beyond mere survival. They were learning to communicate, to trust, and to find comfort in each other's company. One afternoon, as they explored the remains of an old marketplace, Marcus noticed Lyra paused to examine a small object lying on the ground. It was a simple toy, weathered and broken, yet it seemed to capture her attention. She picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands, and Marcus realized that she was remembering a piece of her past, a connection to a life that had been lost in the war. He did not interrupt her, understanding that these small memories were important to her healing. Instead, he offered a gentle smile, giving her space to reconnect with the fragments of her former life. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Marcus found himself thinking less like a soldier and more like a friend and mentor. Lyra, in turn, began to see him not just as a protector but as someone who cared for her, someone who valued her thoughts, opinions, and feelings. They began to share meals together, discuss ideas, and even play small games to pass the time. These simple acts, though ordinary, were extraordinary in their significance. They represented a shift from fear and survival to companionship and mutual respect. Trust was still fragile, however. Lyra sometimes flinched at sudden noises or reacted with caution to unfamiliar gestures. Marcus understood that healing from trauma was not a linear process. He learned to be patient, to offer reassurance without forcing her into situations she was not ready for. Slowly, she began to relax, knowing that Marcus would not harm her, that she had the freedom to make her own choices, and that her safety was genuinely his concern. These small victories in trust were monumental, marking steps toward a more balanced and equal relationship. Marcus also encouraged Lyra to explore her own abilities and talents. She had been trained for survival in her past life, but now she had the chance to develop skills for a different kind of life. Marcus showed her how to navigate the environment, gather resources, and use tools safely. Lyra proved to be incredibly adaptive, combining her past knowledge with the new lessons Marcus offered. She grew more confident with each challenge, understanding that she could rely on her own strength as much as she relied on his protection. Evenings were reserved for reflection and storytelling. They would sit together under the dim light of distant stars, sharing their thoughts about the past, the present, and the possibilities of the future. Marcus told Lyra about life on Earth, the simple pleasures and the values humans held dear. Lyra shared her memories of her home, of traditions, and celebrations, of moments of joy before the war destroyed everything. These stories helped them connect on a deeper level, bridging the gap between human and alien, past and present. Through these experiences, Marcus began to see Lyra not as someone he had inherited, but as a unique individual with her own dreams and potential. He admired her resilience, her curiosity, and her willingness to grow despite the hardships she had endured. Lyra, in turn, began to see Marcus not just as a guardian, but as a companion, a friend, and a guide in a world that still felt uncertain. Together, they were learning the meaning of partnership, of mutual support, and of trust built through shared experiences rather than imposed authority. By the end of this period, Marcus and Lyra had transformed their relationship. It was no longer defined by duty or obligation. It was defined by respect, trust, and genuine connection. They had faced challenges together, learned from one another, and begun to find joy in small moments despite the lingering scars of war. Marcus realized that this was the kind of bond that could endure. A relationship built on understanding rather than control, on choice rather than necessity. For Marcus, the journey was about more than protection. It was about learning to value someone else's perspective, to recognize the strength and intelligence of another being, and to nurture their potential. For Lyra, it was about discovering freedom, understanding her worth, and finding a safe place where she could grow and be herself. Together, they were creating a new way of life in a world that had been fractured by conflict, a life based on trust, mutual respect, and hope for the future. Even in a galaxy still scarred by war, Marcus and Lyra had found a path forward. It was not easy, and it would require patience, courage, and understanding. But with each step they took together, they grew stronger, learning that trust, companionship, and empathy could survive even in the harshest of circumstances. Their bond was no longer fragile. It was a foundation for the life they were beginning to build together, a life that promised healing, growth, and the chance to face the future side by side. The post-war galaxy was far from peaceful. Even though the battles had ended, the remnants of conflict still shaped the lives of everyone who survived. Rogue factions, desperate scavengers, and old rivalries made each day unpredictable. Marcus and Lyra had learned to navigate the ruins of the cities and planets they traveled, but the dangers never truly disappeared. They had become a team, relying on one another for survival, and each challenge they faced together only strengthened their bond. One morning, Marcus noticed signs of recent activity near the outskirts of the city. Footprints and discarded tools indicated that other survivors were moving through the area, some perhaps hostile. He shared his concern with Lyra, who observed carefully before nodding. Over time, she had learned to read the environment as well as Marcus, noticing small details that could mean safety or danger. They decided to move cautiously, sticking to hidden paths and avoiding open areas. Lyra's growing confidence impressed Marcus, and he realized how much she had changed since they first met. She was no longer just someone he needed to protect. She was someone who could actively contribute to their safety. Their journey together was filled with both small victories and tense moments. On one occasion, they encountered a group of scavengers searching for supplies. Marcus and Lyra had to think quickly to avoid confrontation. Marcus signaled Lyra to stay low, and together they found a hidden passage between the ruined buildings. Lyra's quick thinking and observation helped them avoid detection, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. She had not only survived, but she had learned to protect herself and support him as an equal partner. These moments reminded him that trust and teamwork were essential in a world still haunted by conflict. While navigating these dangers, Marcus also discovered Lyra's unique skills. She had an uncanny ability to notice details others might overlook, from hidden paths to subtle changes in the environment. Her instincts were sharp, and her quick thinking often saved them from dangerous situations. Marcus realized that her past as a survivor and her life under strict rules had given her abilities that complemented his own training. They began to rely on each other in ways that went beyond protection. Each brought strengths to the partnership, and together they were stronger than they had been apart. At the same time, Marcus focused on helping Lyra heal emotionally. The trauma of her past had left deep scars, and she sometimes struggled with memories that came unbidden. Marcus learned to recognize the signs of her discomfort and respond with patience and care. He encouraged her to share her feelings and reassured her that she no longer had to fear punishment or control. Slowly, Lyra began to open up more, talking about her experiences, her hopes, and even her dreams for the future. These conversations brought them closer together, building a foundation of trust that went beyond mere survival. Evenings were a time of reflection and learning. Marcus and Lyra would sit beneath the stars, talking about life, the future, and the lessons they had learned from the past. Marcus shared stories of his home on Earth, the simple joys he remembered, and the values that had guided him as a soldier. Lyra, in turn, described the world she had known before the war, the customs of her people, and the lessons she had learned from surviving under harsh conditions. Through these exchanges, they not only learned from one another but also discovered shared values, courage, resilience, and the desire to create a better life. As their bond deepened, Marcus began to understand Lyra in ways he could not have imagined. He saw her resilience, intelligence, and compassion, and he realized that she was not defined by her past or the labels others had placed on her. Lyra, too, began to see Marcus as more than a protector. She recognized his kindness, patience, and willingness to learn from her experiences. Together, they formed a partnership built on equality, respect, and mutual support, a stark contrast to the control and fear that had defined her earlier life. Despite the dangers of the outside world, Marcus and Lyra found moments of joy. They explored abandoned buildings, discovering relics of the lives that had once flourished there. They laughed at small discoveries, shared meals they found or prepared together, and even played games to pass the time. These moments were not just distractions. They were reminders that life could continue, even in a world scarred by conflict. Lyra began to smile more freely, her laughter becoming a sign that healing was possible. Marcus, too, felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years, knowing that they could create pockets of hope even amidst destruction. The challenges they faced also taught them important lessons. Marcus learned that protection alone was not enough. He needed to empower Lyra, giving her the tools and confidence to make her own decisions. Lyra learned to trust Marcus not just with her safety, but with her feelings and thoughts. Each challenge strengthened their communication and understanding, helping them anticipate each other's actions and respond effectively. They became more than companions. They became a team in the truest sense, each contributing to the well-being and success of the other. One particularly difficult day, they encountered remnants of a rogue faction attempting to seize control of a resource-rich area. Marcus and Lyra had to act carefully to avoid conflict while ensuring their own safety. Lyra's quick thinking allowed them to navigate the area without confrontation, finding alternative paths and signaling Marcus when danger approached. Marcus realized that her presence had changed his perspective on teamwork. He no longer saw her as someone to protect. He saw her as an equal partner whose skills and instincts were vital to their survival. Through these experiences, Marcus and Lyra continued to grow together. They learned that true companionship required patience, understanding, and respect. It was not about control or ownership, but about supporting one another, valuing each other's abilities, and trusting each other completely. Lyra's growing confidence and independence reinforced Marcus's belief that freedom and respect were far more important than orders or hierarchy. Their relationship became a model of collaboration, resilience, and mutual care in a galaxy still recovering from war. By the end of this period, Marcus and Lyra had faced numerous challenges together and emerged stronger. They had navigated dangers, learned from one another, and built a bond that went beyond survival. Marcus understood that protecting Lyra meant empowering her, while Lyra realized that true freedom could be found not only in independence, but in trust and shared experience. Together, they were creating a life that reflected hope, resilience, and the possibility of a future unbound by fear. As night fell over the ruins, they sat together under the stars, reflecting on the journey so far. The galaxy was still a place of uncertainty and danger, but for Marcus and Lyra, the bond they had forged offered stability, comfort, and strength. They had faced challenges together, learned to trust one another, and discovered the power of partnership in the face of adversity. In a world recovering from the devastation of war, they had found not just survival, but a shared path forward, a life built on respect, trust, and hope. Months had passed since Marcus and Lyra had begun their journey together. The galaxy, still scarred by war, was slowly beginning to recover. New communities were forming, trade routes reopened cautiously, and survivors were learning to rebuild their lives. Yet the world was not completely safe or predictable. For Marcus and Lyra, each day brought both opportunities and challenges. But through it all, they had learned to rely on one another, and their bond had grown into something far deeper than either had expected. Lyra had transformed in remarkable ways. She was no longer the timid, cautious girl who had first appeared before Marcus. Her confidence had grown steadily as she explored her own abilities and discovered that she could face the world with courage. She had learned to read the environment, anticipate danger, and navigate complex situations with skill and intelligence. More importantly, she had discovered her own voice, her independence, and her right to make choices. Marcus watched this transformation with admiration. She had endured so much, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. Marcus, too, had changed. The war had left him weary, burdened with memories of battles and loss. But through his time with Lyra, he had discovered a purpose beyond the battlefield. Protecting and supporting her had taught him patience, empathy, and the power of trust. He realized that true strength was not just physical or tactical, it was emotional, built on understanding, respect, and care for another being. With Lyra by his side, he felt a renewed sense of hope and direction. Together, they had created a life that balanced safety, growth, and companionship. Their days were filled with a mixture of exploration, learning, and quiet moments of reflection. They traveled cautiously between settlements, sometimes helping others who had survived the war, sometimes scavenging for supplies in abandoned cities. Lyra's perspective added depth to every decision they made. She could see possibilities and risks that Marcus might have overlooked, and her insight often helped them avoid unnecessary danger. In turn, Marcus shared his knowledge of strategy, survival, and problem-solving, teaching Lyra how to handle difficult situations with calm and confidence. Together, they complemented each other perfectly, forming a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. Despite the challenges, they found joy in small things. They shared meals they had prepared together, exploring new foods and flavors. They watched distant suns rise and set over ruined landscapes, marveling at the beauty that persisted even amidst destruction. They laughed at small discoveries, like finding a forgotten toy or a piece of art that had survived the war. These moments reminded them both that life was worth cherishing, even after tragedy. Lyra began to smile more freely, her laughter becoming a symbol of hope and renewal. Marcus felt that same sense of joy, realizing that happiness could still exist in a world scarred by conflict. Over time, the labels of the past, slave, soldier, survivor, began to fade. Lyra was no longer defined by her experiences of captivity, nor was Marcus defined solely by his life as a soldier. They were individuals with their own strengths, dreams, and purpose, but they had also formed a bond that enriched both of their lives. Marcus treated Lyra not as a responsibility or obligation, but as a partner, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. Lyra, in turn, trusted Marcus not just with her safety, but with her heart and her choices. Together, they discovered that freedom was not just a legal status. It was a feeling, a state of mind, and a relationship built on respect and care. Thought. Challenges of the outside world did not disappear entirely. One day they encountered a group of survivors in need of assistance. Marcus and Lyra had to decide how to help without putting themselves at risk. Lyra suggested a careful plan that balanced caution with action, and together they executed it successfully. Their teamwork demonstrated how much they had grown. Neither relied solely on the other. Instead, they combined their strengths, respected each other's judgment, and worked in harmony. This experience reinforced the lesson they had learned. Over and over, trust and cooperation were essential in a world still recovering from war. As the weeks went by, Marcus and Lyra began to imagine a future beyond survival. They spoke of creating a safe home, a place where they could rest, plan, and grow together. They discussed new opportunities, from exploring distant planets to helping rebuild communities torn apart by the war. For the first time, both felt the excitement of hope rather than the anxiety of danger. They realized that their bond was not just a response to circumstance, it was the foundation of a life they wanted to build together. Evenings remained a time of reflection. They would sit together under the stars, sharing stories and dreams. Marcus told Lyra about his hopes for peace and unity among the planets, about a galaxy where cooperation and understanding could replace fear and conflict. Lyra shared her own visions of a life filled with freedom, learning, and connection with others. These discussions strengthened their bond, helping them see that they were not just surviving, they were shaping the world they wanted to live in. Their partnership had evolved into a shared journey toward growth, understanding, and hope. By the end of this period, Marcus and Lyra had built a life that reflected resilience, trust, and mutual respect. They had faced dangers together, overcome challenges, and learned to support one another in ways neither could have imagined when the war first ended. Marcus had come to see Lyra as a friend, companion, and equal partner. Lyra had come to see Marcus as a guide, protector, and trusted ally. Together, they had created a world where freedom, choice, and connection were possible, even amidst the lingering scars of war. The galaxy was still full of uncertainty, but Marcus and Lyra were ready to face it together. They had learned that true companionship was not about control, obligation, or fear. It was about understanding, trust, and respect. It was about valuing one another's abilities, supporting each other's growth, and sharing both challenges and joys. And in this understanding, they found a sense of peace and hope that neither had experienced before. As night fell over the recovering cities, Marcus and Lyra stood together on a quiet hill, looking out over the landscape. The stars shone brightly above, distant and beautiful, reminding them that even in a galaxy scarred by war, there was still light. They had survived, learned, and grown, and they were ready to embrace whatever the future held. Their journey had been difficult, but it had led them to a life filled with trust, freedom, and the promise of new beginnings. And together, they knew they could face anything.